All right, cool. We might get started. I'm just going to give a quick introduction to Dan. Well, I'll just tell the people in the room. He's an amazing statistical modeler and has made me rethink a lot of the ways that we can probably do things a little bit better than what we've been doing. But one thing I have learned definitely and been reminded of is that there's no such thing as a correct model and that all models are in fact wrong. So that's something that we should always remember. And yeah, I'll take it away, let Dan take it away.
Thanks for coming, guys. This is really great. What I want to talk to you about today is the gap between science and management, and specifically the gap between applied ecology and the information that we provide to management versus the information that they need to do their jobs. And so I am, you know what? I need a pointer. Who can help me with this? Okay. Well, I'm an independent researcher. I'm a systems ecologist, and so I kind of get my hands into anything and everything. I've worked in many places in the U.S. and now many places here. I've been in Australia for, I don't know, working here since 2000, doing work here since 2008, I believe, and now I'm Australian, believe it or not. And so in working across disciplines in all these different places, I find myself stepping into different disciplines, right? And so before I moved here, this is about 11 years ago, I believe, I stepped out of the University of Florida and started doing just independent research. Thought if I can do real research on my own, that's good enough for me. And it was great because I could bring my job here and come here to claim my wife, Lee Beasley, the messy-haired one right there. And what I do is I do anything data analysis and management, right? So it's whether it's monitoring, design, evaluation, analyses, dealing with difficult data sets that nobody knows what to do with, giving advice, making management tools. And so I step into these different disciplines, and you'll see lots of different ones up there. Invasive species control, it could be mammals, invertebrates, reptiles, amphibians. I do a lot of work with fisheries, stock assessment for commercial fisheries back in the US, and a lot of recreational fishery stuff here. And it provides a perspective. And so my experience with that is that all these disciplines are sort of like their own little cultures. And they have got a history of how they developed, right? How much support they might have got from society as they're developing. The problems that they face might be a little bit different, and definitely the way they think about the problems and the tools that they apply are very different. And so the one thing that seems to always remain, well, is the same, is common amongst them, is that because it's applied ecology that I'm doing, that information is always supposed to be coming back to some sort of management cycle, right? And giving some sort of guidance to management. And so you've probably seen like one of these conceptual models before of a management cycle. And Google it, you'll see like 100 of them, right? And this is a simple one. And basically what you've got is you've got a management body, it makes a decision, right? There's an action, we monitor, do some sort of analysis and assessment, and that comes back as guidance, right? And in that cycle, I've made the green boxes where science fits in, okay? And so the top circle is like our side experiments maybe, right? So many in applied ecology, so much of our research is funded by management agencies that need real questions to their problems, right? And so they'll give us funding and we design an experiment and we come around. And I like mythology, right? And Arthurian legend a little bit. And I like to think about the management body or the manager is like King Arthur, right? They've got, they've got a vision of the kingdom, and that is the management objectives, right? And they got to make some really difficult decisions because not everybody in that kingdom wants the same thing. but they're looking at the bigger picture, and they have to wrestle with trade-offs and all these things to try to create this situation, right? The objectives being met. And from that perspective, the scientists coming back in, probably you and I, unless there is a manager in the room, is there someone that actually makes management decisions? Awesome. Call me out, but not in front of everyone, okay? All right. Yeah, okay, well, I'll take notes from you. And so that puts us, we're like Merlin in that legend, right? We're the advisor to the king, right? The king is wrestling with all these, the queen is wrestling with all these problems and trade-offs and has to create this situation, meet these objectives, and they've got pressures coming in from society and probably ministers in real life and everything else, right? And they're probably not like the best population dynamicists out there. They probably don't know everything about the ecology of the systems that they're working in, the trees, the fish, everything. And so that's our role. We got to give them that guidance. And so what I want to talk about today is how that guidance gets given. Because typically, I would say it's not given in a really good form that can be used to make the decisions as is, right? And so a manager often will have very specific questions. There's constraints. They can't just do whatever they want, right? They have got questions of, for example, what volume of flow parcel do I send down the river for an environmental flow that's going to promote, I don't know, a wetland, promote fish spawning, right? They don't want to know if floods do promote fish spawning. They want to know how much water, right? If they're baiting foxes, cats, then they might want to know, we've got this much money, which means this much baits. How do we distribute it among these, finite sites to kill the most foxes and help the most native mammals? It's stuff like that. And when we deliver, sometimes in our publications, we'll put in an applied journal or something, the actual management advice that's in there, it doesn't really help those questions so much. And this is just an excerpt from a discussion in a paper that I'm a part of. And all it says about management, it's funded by a management organization to answer management questions. It says, such findings have important implications for management. There's nothing else useful after that. That's it, right? In reports, this is a report that I'm a part of also, we give pictures. Like a picture doesn't answer the specific questions, right? And I'm not saying these things are bad unto themselves. I'm just saying they aren't as effective as maybe we could be at giving that information. So when this vague information comes in, we're humans, right? And so now it's got to be processed into an answer, and that requires a mental model. And a model is just a logic train. It's if this, then that. If that, then this. That's a mathematical model. It's explicit. These things, if this is true, this has to be true. Now, when you do that in your mind, it's not as easy because we're human, right? And most of what's going on in our decision-making in a daily life, it's unconscious. We don't even know the assumptions that we're making. We have an amygdala that's recording things our entire life, that it's in the background, changing how we feel in our decisions. And so it's not explicit, it can't be reviewed, it's difficult to pass down that knowledge to the next generation of managers. Furthermore, we're humans and we have biases, right? And that's not an insidious thing. They can be as simple as confirmation bias, where we tend to conclude the conclusion that we already believe to be true. It's just human, right? There's risk tolerances, risk averse versus I'm more okay with risk. Like Leah's risk averse, I'm more okay with risk. It's tough for us sometimes. And so the question is what gets us out of this is a bit of that onus is on the scientists. And if we can give them the information closer to this, then that we can avoid some of those pitfalls and traps. And so how do you do that? It's not can we do better, it's how do we do better? And so I've got a couple techniques, tricks, procedures that I've learned from just work, from one of my mentors, from a bit of schooling that I've run into that I think can be really useful. And so what I'm going to do, really useful, and they can be just an extension to what you already do in the research, the ecological research that you might be doing now. It's not like you have to do, an entire new analysis, right? It can fit into a paper actually quite easily. And so how this is going to look, I forgot to start my timer. How this is going to look is I've got a couple model systems that we're going to use as examples, and then we're going to set up a problem. I'm going to step through examples of these things. I'm not going to define them now. We'll do that as I go through them. Okay. And so this will be our first example system. This is Haddle Lakes. It's a wetland in Victoria on the side of the Murray River. It's an icon site. Historically, it would have been flooded probably annually by small, medium, and large floods, right? And so now, because of all the water that's extracted and river regulation, the only flooding it gets is by very large floods. And so since it's an icon site, and there is a desire to keep it as a wetland, there's an environmental flow program. And so what they do is they pump water periodically out of the Murray River and put it into the lake system. And then there's these infrastructure, right? It's like little dams and stuff. So they can hold the water into this series of lakes for a period of time. And then they let it flow back out, right? And so I don't know how often they do this, but it's not annually. And, and so if we set up the problem for our example, there is a management objective, and it has to do with the riparian plant community, the understory vegetation. They want to, their objective, this is one in the management program, but that objective is to maintain the water-dependent plant taxa, right? And so that's both specific and vague. We don't know what maintain means, but let's just say we don't want it to go down. We know that. The management questions around that are, or can be, or this is 3 of them at least, is what volume of water do we pump into these lakes, right? For how long do we hold it in there, and at what periodicity? Now, we're just going to, for our example, we're just going to focus on what volume of water, right? And so now we've got a management objective of the riparian plant community and a question of how much water do we need to pump in there to maintain that. Okay, so I got brought in on this problem 2017 maybe, I think. And so the reports that usually go the data are collected in the plant community, right? And so the reports that come back from that to the managing body have information like this. I'm not sure if I'm on this report or not. I think I probably am. But here's your pictures, right? There's always the pictures. That's maintained. Some years it's green, some years it's more brown, right? We've got a bar plot of native and exotic vegetation. Up here we've got some points for different places of native and exotic abundance of different places in the transects that are sampled. Let me tell you, a manager probably doesn't care about what's going on in different places in the transect. They're managing that system, right? And so this is, it's not that useful for answering the question, how much water? It takes a lot more mental acrobatics to get to that answer from this, right? But this has been going on for a while, and it's sort of like expected that this is how it is. This is what we get. We pay for this, and what we get back, right? And so when I got brought in, the idea was, let's see if we can do better with this data. Can we get closer to that management question? And so the first thing we do with that is we build some sort of predictive model, right? And this bit's important because all of my examples I'm going to give you that I'm creeping up on right now are they require a predictive model. And so what is a predictive model? Well, it doesn't have to be complex or crazy. It can be a linear regression is a predictive model, right? A logistic regression is a predictive model. What's not a predictive model is something like a multivariate analysis, like PCA or non-dimensional scaling, those sorts of things. Chi-square test isn't a predictive model, but and really a Backy design with the ANOVA, its predictive ability is pretty small, and so we have to build something that you can predict a data point with. And for this analysis, it was a multi-taxa dynamic logistic regression. All you really need to hear is logistic regression. Just a simple old logistic regression with a bunch of species, and it's got this little dynamic thing in it, right? That's just a part of the structure that I'm using. Okay, so on the Y, we've got plant occurrence. They sample them in transects. They identify the species in there. They do this around the lake annually. Okay, this relates to the management objective, right? We want to keep these plants around the water-dependent taxa. That's on the Y. And then you've got an intercept, beta naught. You've got beta 1. The effect, that could be like flooding. This represents your management lever, or needs to be related to it in some way if you're going to answer a management question, right? We've got a management lever. We got another detail over here I'm not really going to talk about, except for right this minute. We got rainfall. It was important. They're dryland plants. They love water, right? So here we've got the management lever as a predictor. We got the management objective on the outside. Now, of course, it was a lot more complex than this. We had a lot of parameters in there describing different shapes of relationships and lag periods, antecedent effects, and whatnot. But that's the basics. I want to instill in you guys that this what I'm going to show you isn't really that hard to do. And so I don't want to really show a bunch of maths and stuff. It doesn't really take that. It's how you think about it, and you'll see. So that model, there's 148 species. For each year that we had, we can predict what the occurrence probability was for every species, given what our predictor variables were, right? Flooding, we can do that. Not that useful, but getting useful. Now we summarize that into species richness for the water-dependent taxa. Now we're getting there, right? So this represents our objective. Again, we got the management lever over here. This is an index of the flooding that happened in the system. You with me so far? We got our plant richness of water-dependent taxa. We've got our index of flooding. Now, if you've got an analysis like a regression, logistic regression, that can do that, then you can do the first thing, a counterfactual analysis, right? This will step you closer to the management objectives. They'll give you more information for management to work with. And so what is a counterfactual analysis? It's counter to the fact. It is what didn't happen, right? And so in the ecological papers where you see this, it represents what would have happened if there was no management, right? And so for this, I was hired to do this analysis. And so what you do is, we got all this flooding data. We go to the nice hydrologist, Andrew Keogh, and say, hey, can you subtract off the environmental water from the flooding data that you gave us? And he says, yeah. And so we got a red dotted line that represents what the flooding condition would have been like in Hatta Lakes if they hadn't have pumped water in for these years. And all we do is we feed it back through the model. Incidentally, there's good papers out there if you get interested in this. That one's really good. I really like that paper. So we feed that water as our X variable now back through the model, and we predict what the plant occurrence would be, right? There you go. So what do you get to learn from this, from doing an exercise like this? Well, you can see maybe the value of management. We see that it did something. It kept the plants at higher richness. But this is a retrospective thing. Like you can say, well, what we did kept things, but it really doesn't help you learn easily what you could do in the future to do even better with your water, right? It doesn't get at that. And that's really what we want to be doing. And so if I was to be hired again, and I tried to convince to do this other thing, but it's tough. It's tough. I would try harder, because with the same effort, you can feed through any scenario. If you can do a counterfactual, right? That just represents one management scenario that you could put through your model to predict the outcome. And so you could go to your manager and say, what are your management options that you want to know which is better than the other for meeting your objective? And they can tell you, you can set up data for that. Now, this isn't that. I just made this up, right? So we put in two scenarios. The green dotted dashed line up there. It's like 20% more water. Let's feed that through. The blue line, which is silly, but it's different, right? Let's feed the same thing through every year. And now we can feed that through and predict what the water is, right? And so this sort of thing, this is, I refer to as just predicting management scenarios. I picked this up from a man named Carl Walters. He was promoting these sort of things in 1972, right, for management. He was promoting this for management of riparian vegetation here in Australia in the Murray-Darling Basin in the early 90s. And well, we're still not doing it yet, though. He calls it gaming. Let's game your analysis, basically. And so we feed these through the model, and we get the predictions out. And we see the green. More water gave us more richness of plants. Right? Now we're getting somewhere. Now we're learning about how to manage, right? Incidentally, the same water every year, the blue dashed line, it does worse than no water, right? Now, maybe I should do a little more debugging of the analysis, but actually that is a plausible outcome, because there are feedbacks in this analysis, and each plant has its optimum, and then there's too little water, and there's too much water, and there's how much rain did you get 6 months ago? So it is plausible. But so that represents two things you can do, right? This one has a lot of power, right? And in terms of impact, the impact that you could have taking this additional step, right, with your analyses for management, well, it seems like it could be pretty good, especially if you're connected with the manager and you can get from them exactly what scenarios they want to know about, right? If you're still you care about papers, you're a scientist, maybe you're an academic, you got to get your H factor up. Let me tell you, the applied ecology journals, they love this stuff, right? This slots into a paper really easily. And so you get the best of both worlds. The thing that's even better about this is that if you imagine an actual management cycle that's happening annually, right? And so we've got monitoring data coming into an analysis that's getting updated. Another decision's made, the action, and then you step into the next year. You could use that analysis and evaluate, play what-if games with it. Every single year, it becomes a decision tool, basically. And so just that simple step of having your predictive model, setting it up like this, being able to create your simulated fake data representing management scenarios, feed it through and make predictions. It's a lot of bang for your buck. It really is. And it's a really powerful exercise. Okay, so that's 2 of the 4, right, that I'm going to go over. And so what we've looked at is counterfactual analysis, management scenarios. We mentioned how your H factor could probably improve, from doing these, and how it could be embedded in a management cycle as a decision tool. All right. What time is it? Okay. Okay, good. Okay, so we're going to change gears and change the model system we're working in. So the new model system is the stocking of Australian bass for recreational fishing in New South Wales. Okay, and so in New South Wales, there's all these systems, and this is happening also in Queensland and whatnot, but I know about New South Wales. And they've got all these systems, these river systems and impoundments that they are dumping juvenile Australian bass into, right, to support the fisheries. And there is an entire population of anglers out there, and anglers are very interesting people. They're the most passionate people that you've ever met. They are crazy for fishing. They love it, right? And so there's tournaments and whatnot. And you can go online and Google this. And there's just so much stuff, right? They're really into it. And there's these little news articles and these really broad newspapers and stuff like that, such as the Clarence Valley Independent, that say things like, record 429,000 stock this year, right? And they're all over there. You just Google it. That's all I did, right? And so what they do is they hold these tournaments, and they decided to start using the tournaments as like a form of citizen science, right? And so the people that are a part of it, they measure the fish, and they get you write it down on a data sheet, and you get numbers and catch in their effort, right? So you get catch rates. That's the important bit to me. So I was asked to, so this is like, right now it's like almost 40 years of data, and I'm aware of 13 systems. There could be more, right, that they're doing this in. It's not every year. It's a bit patchy, but it's a long-term data set. It's cool. I was asked if we could see trends in this, right? And now catch rates, angler catch rates are not good measures of abundance. They just don't represent very well. But the cool thing about this is that what the management objectives of a system like this are for angler catch rates to be as high as possible. So you're measuring the performance of that management directly relative to the objective. So that's a cool thing, right? So we've got that. In terms of the management question is quite simple. It's how many fish should we stock into which system and how often, right? And so I got asked to look for trends at first. The analysis I used, before I talk about that, this graph, I'm going to show several graphs like this, right? These are terrible graphs. I apologize. But what we've got, each panel represents a system. And it could be an impoundment, like the one in the top corner, Brugga Dam. It could be a river. And some of them are stocked, some of them aren't. That's good. I wanted that information to learn about just natural variability outside of stocking. There's some zeros, and sometimes when other graphs slides, they don't. But this represents the numbers of each year of the data set that I used at that time that were stocked. And so mostly they're stocking in impoundments. Rivers are getting stocked sometimes, but not as much. But some of these stocking things like Lake Yarrawonga, there's 2 years where they got like 150,000 juveniles stocked into them. Like they're really pumping some numbers into these lakes. So I was asked about trends, and so I used a model that was very similar to the plant model, because it's all ones and zeros to me, right? And so it's a dynamic, it's actually a Poisson model, not a logistic regression this time, but it's a regression. And I've got not multiple species, I've got multiple sites. That's the only difference. So I use that model, and these are the trends. Now, as I got to know the client, I realized, actually, we're not as interested in trends as I thought. We're interested in the stocking, right? And so real quick, we'll look at a counterfactual since you know what it is. It's real easy in this analysis. You know, you got catch rates on the Y, your predictor is stocking. I don't need a hydrologist to do this when I just take the stocking and make it 0, right? And I feed it through. And so now instead of the unstocked systems are now grayed out instead of having zeros on them. But these are the predictions from that feeding that counterfactual stocking and no stocking fake data through. And you'll see that in the impoundments, like the Brogo Dam at the top. Hopefully you can read that. Carey Hall Dam, Lake Yarrawonga. The catch rates are the red dashed line, right? And so the red dashed line just drops to the floor. It predicts 0, right? And so what it's saying is if you didn't stock, there would be no catch. And that is biologically realistic because these fish, they require flow cues to spawn, right? And in the reservoirs, they don't get that. And so these fisheries are supported by stocking. There's no natural recruitment of juveniles in the adulthood. There's not much spawning that happens. And so stocking works in these systems because there's no reproduction. That's how you got to get fish into there, if that's your goal. Now, in the rivers, you'll notice that really the red dashed line is laying over top mostly of the line that predicts what happened with stocking, right? And so, and sometimes the red line's a little bit higher, right? That's just subtle, and so what's happening there is, well, what the conclusion you draw is that stocking is having no effects on catch rates in the river systems, right? Those are natural recruiting populations. They spawn, they do their thing normally. And that's also biologically realistic, right? It's not only realistic, it's the way it should be, given what we know about population dynamics. And so the thing with fish, and this stuff was, like I was talking about these different cultures, commercial fisheries, they were supported by society because they were about the development of the science in commercial fisheries was about food security and about viable economics, right? Everybody's on board that we should have commercial fisheries doing well. We should have fish stocks out there that are healthy. In the other disciplines I work in, not everybody's on board that we should recover endangered species and things like that. And recreational fisheries are an entirely different culture than the commercial. And there isn't much communication between the two. But here's what's happening. This is in the early 50s, a guy named Sidney Holt sorted out the density-dependent relationships that happen in fish. And that density-dependent survival occurs in the juvenile fish stage. And that's just about ubiquitous across fish species. It's one of the most important pieces of information we use to determine harvest regulations for commercial fisheries. The other one is the productivity, the life history of the species, right? And so this is known in that space. But in other spaces, it's not in the common awareness, right? It makes too much sense. You stock something in, you think there's more. There's a bottleneck, and hopefully you know how to interpret this drawing, that when the fish reach their juvenile stage, there isn't enough resources to go around, and so their survival declines. It doesn't matter how many you stock into that window. You're only getting the same number out. And so basically these rivers, they're kind of sitting around their carrying capacity. And there's the stock and fish in, and the survival's just dropping on average of the fish, and you get the same number recruiting to adulthood. And so that's the explanation. And it's as expected, right? Okay, so we already done counterfactuals. Let's move on to the next one. This next tool is referred to as the Omniscient Manager. Okay, omniscient, all-knowing. Wouldn't that be nice, right? Okay, so what does it do? It sorts out the management action or the regulation or policy or whatever you want to call it that achieves the specific management objective. It's not about comparing option A to option B, which one's better. It's what exactly meets this objective for us, right? It's the perfect option, okay? And so you need to know, of course, what's your objective, right, to do this. And for us, our objective is the highest catch rates possible, because I've never heard an angler say, well, I don't want to catch any more than this, right? But we're going to put a constraint on that. Over the 13 systems that this data set is for, and the 33 years that I have up here, about 2.5 million fish have been stocked, right? So we're going to cap it at that many. We're going to say this, the all-knowing manager, all they can do is take that number and they can distribute it among the systems in years in the way that optimizes catch rates. All right, how do you do this? This is going to probably sound a little bit weird, but you got your same regression model, right? In this case, this is verbally how you do it, okay? When you fit it, you've got your catch rates, your stocking information, and you've got the parameters that you're trying to estimate, an intercept and the effect of stocking. What you do is you fix those parameter estimates and treat them like they're data. And you solve for the stocking that optimizes the catch rates, right? You can do this in Excel, right, with Solver. I did it in R with Optum. And I know in your mind probably it's like, what? But it's easy, right? It actually is. If I could show you, but that's not a part of this seminar. All right. So here, when I run this on this system, okay, same sort of structure of graphs. This is the Omniscient Manager's stocking regime, right? Relative to what actually happened. And so one thing, just one thing, okay, look, ignore these little spikes. That's an artifact, okay? I don't want to hear any questions about those spikes. Just pretend like they're not there. The Omniscient Manager, it chooses not to stock rivers. Ignore the spikes, okay? They don't stock rivers. There's nothing in it for you. You're not going to get anything out of it. They throw all of the resources into the impoundments. And the other neat thing about it that we can learn is that there's a pattern that drops out, at least in 3 of these impoundments. I don't know why it hasn't come out in the other one. And this pattern has been proposed before for stocking. They call it maintenance stocking, right? And basically what they do is they stock the numbers up, get the catch rates up, and then you just sort of ride that and decrease and just sort of maintain those high catch rates. And it takes less and less and less and less and less to maintain them, right? And so that is the best you can do. That's the best you can do with those numbers for catch rates. At the top of this slide, right, is 2 things. The number of fish that were stocked, and then the outcome. The number of fish represents the number of fish that were stocked. And the Omniscient Manager chose not to stock 10 that we did in real life. That's just an estimation, variant. But the outcome is the sum of the catch rates over the 33 years. I probably should have picked a more intuitive index, but think of it as an index. It's the catch rates that came out of this. The Omniscient Manager did about 20% or so better in the catch rates than the way that stocking was done in the systems, the way they actually did it, okay? And so we've done better for the system. And how do the predictions come out? Again, the black line is the actual predictions of stocking, of what the catch rates were under the actual stocking regime. The red dashed line is the predictions under the Omniscient stocking regime. Incidentally, the circles are the years where there were tournaments. Some years I don't have data that you can see, and the model sort of fills through. But so that's the improvement in the catch rates that the Omniscient Manager produced. Okay, so that's cool. That's a good tool to learn, right? You won't be able to do the perfect management, but to know what it is a nice thing, because maybe you can at least start like putting what do they say, the things, lining the things up so that maybe one day we could do better, closer to what would work perfectly. All right. So this is the last tool I'm going to show you. And It's referred to as management strategy evaluation. And this one can get complex, right? But it's super cool. It's very commonly done in commercial fisheries, stock assessments. What it is it's a simulation. You're simulating the management cycle across years. That's what you're doing. And what that looks like is you've got your analysis that this is how you would use your analysis, so like my analysis here for this simulation, right? You would start it off and use the analysis. You just give it a starting catch rate, right? And then the manager has to make a decision. The simulated manager decides what to stock based on a rule, some sort of rule. They stock. You use your analysis in the simulation to predict what that stocking did and for the next year's catch rates. And then it steps to the next year. And there's some sort of rule of how many to stock. And then the analysis predicts how many to stock next year. I can see by the look on your face that me stepping here wasn't helpful. But that, yeah, it's often called a closed loop simulation also, because it's cycling through this annual management cycle. It's mimicking this management cycle, and the use of the model is to predict what happens. Right now, the use of this is you can evaluate any aspect of the management cycle. You can run one simulation one way, and then you can change the information type that the manager has. You can change the risk profile. You can change whether the anglers even pay attention to the fishing rules, right? You can change the decision rule, how the manager makes the decision. You can change this, and that's what we're going to look at. That's what the example is going to be. Okay, so we're looking at decision rules. All right. So what's a decision rule? Decision rule is a rule that a manager can use that will impact the decision they make each year, right? And it's dynamic. So there's a rule, but that means the outcome of the decision will be, the actual management action will be different each year. And so one example for like the Hatter Lakes environmental flows. Each year a manager could look back and say, well, how much water do I send into this wetland? Say, well, how much flooding occurred in the past 6 months? How much rainfall occurred? If it's high, there could be a rule that you would send less water in. Now, the analysis I did showed that is it. You could tailor your management decision to that year, right? And then the next year, manager asks the same question, and there's the rule. How much? It was really low. We're going to put more water into the system this year. So that's an example of decision rule. For the Australian bass stocking, the decision rule that I'm going to use is really simple. Okay. One thing, because I'm talking fast and I forgot to tell you, was the analysis estimates carrying capacity that I use. It's part of the dynamic part, right? And so I'm using like analysis that treats this catch rate like abundance, even though it's not. And so this carrying capacity is like, it's sort of like the maximum catch rate that you can squeeze out of this system, right? And it estimates that, and it did it. And that was great, because you can't always get that. And so this decision rule, I just made it up, right? I made it up, and I thought, well, how about if the manager in this year looked back at last year and said, what were the catch rates last year? And then said, well, what's the difference between the catch rates that we had last year and the maximum that we can get from this system? And then they stock the difference, stock the amount of fish that would predict to make up the difference and bring the catch rates back up to the max in this year, right? Then they step through again, look next year, say, well, okay, what's the difference? How much lower than the maximum were we last year? And then you predict, you use whatever the method that you're using to say, we stock up with the numbers, that will bring that up. And the simulation rolls on, okay? Okay. Okay. All right. What's the next slide? Okay, so when I give this simulation that decision rule, these are the stocking numbers. This is what gets stocked in the systems, and I made the graphs on the same scale so you could really compare really well the numbers. Again, ignoring these spikes, right? And so under that decision rule, a lot less fish got stocked, right? Ultimately, and of course, no stocking. Well, I think, yeah, the rivers don't get stocked anyway. And so if we go back to the numbers at the top, right, the numbers of fish that stocked, the number that actually got stocked, 2.5 million. The number that are stocked with this decision rule is 250,000, right? These fish are like $3 a piece. That's a lot of money, right? Savings. And look at the catch rates index. We still did better, right, with the decision rule. Still did better. I mean, like that kind of information is gold, right? It's actually more than gold. It's about $8 million, I think, of savings, right? And so the and we don't really even need to see this slide. We know that the catch rates did a little bit better, basically. We didn't do as well as the Omniscient Manager, but we did a little bit better. So what motivated me to want to give this talk and this information is because, in my experience, outside of commercial fisheries assessment, these tools aren't really used much. They wouldn't blink an eye at it, right? They have a very different relationship to the management cycle than I find other ecological management and conservation kind of things. But it's great. It's a great place to look to and see what they're doing because they're a little bit more, they've got their process figured out. They are not perfect. And please don't get annoyed by me. Keep bringing them up, right? They're not perfect. But they've got some cool tools and they've been at it for longer. And I think that the more that these tools are in the awareness of scientists like the folks here and managers are aware that this is available, right? This is available, that it will be expected more and we can maybe do better with it. And so I'm just going to flip through some slides to get back to your H factor stuff. But I want to tell you, my H factor is pretty low. It's pretty low. I haven't had a big impact at all. But doing these management scenarios and using these tools, right? It doesn't matter what your animal is, doesn't matter anything. I've done this with grasslands in savanna, urban stream restoration in Perth, we've done it. Fish reproduction with environmental flows, we're doing it. Recovery of Murray crayfish, we're doing it there. Riparian trees, is Carolyn Canham here? No, I'm gonna have to talk to her about that. So, you can do this with anything, and it doesn't take a whole lot, right? It just takes setting up your analysis right, having your Y representing the objectives, being relatable to the objectives, your X variable being relatable and representing a lever that a manager could pull, and then it requires somebody to recognize it and want to fund you a little bit and use it, right? And so what I would envision as the best situation that could be the best marriage of science and management to have an impact on the management process, right? And on conservation, the outcomes that we get, right? Are again, the same darn picture. And how I would envision it happening is, you can imagine, at the starting point. I've never had this opportunity. This is just all my imagination. At the starting point, we know we have to manage this system. The Fitzroy River is doing it right now. They're right at the beginning with water management. And you would first, you know what your objectives are, at least at some degree, right? The first year data that gets collected for the monitoring, you start that. Now, that's not going to be that useful, right? But if you already know in your mind what analysis that's going to fit into and what tricks you plan to pull with that analysis so that it can help the decision process, right? You're going to know what data to be collecting. And that first data set's going to tell you how able you are to gather the things that you need to gather, right? Probably the first 2 to 3 years are going to be they can inform how you're going to learn about learning in the system and monitoring. Once you hit like year 4, you can start running your cool models, okay? And now you're able to learn something about managing. In this sort of idea where you've got new data, update the analysis, it helps the decision process, management action, new data. The information is accumulating, right? It's not like every year is a brand new year. Every year you get better information for how to manage, right? This is an extremely efficient use of data, and it's planned out, right? It's good. So what you would find out is along the way, that data is going to tell you what the important uncertainties are. It's going to let you know what you aren't good at learning. You can use it to figure out the important uncertainties. What are the impactful things that we don't know? And at some point, you're going to realize just collecting data along the way is some things we can't learn. And so that tells you what is the side experiments that you have to go fund these crazy academics to go do for you to inform, but you know how it's going to feed back into your model that helps you make decisions, okay? And so it gets designed the right way and it comes back in. And you go along like that, and the model's getting stronger. You can bring in more covariates and different nuisance parameters that might be moderating the effects of management that have been making it difficult for you to learn, right? If you run into a place where you just can't get the information from the side experiments and from just the variation that's happening in the system, then what can be done with management is a management action that's purposeful, that it pushes the system into a direction that creates an extreme data point. Like we run a big flood, right? Or in fisheries, it's often, and very unpopular, it's to find out the density dependence and life history relationship of fish, right? Basically, how much can you fish that stock? You kind of got to fish them down a little bit and then stop fishing, and seeing them recover creates the data that gives you the information to know how much you can fish them. That's not popular, and nobody does it, by the way. But when I'm saying this, right, I was thinking about this today, right? I'm thinking about this today because I'm making my last slides. And I'm like, oh, this isn't my idea. This is adaptive management, right? Who's heard of adaptive management? Come on, put them up if you just shoot them up, right? Okay, a lot of people. Adaptive management is mandated in some countries, right? It is how you learn how to manage. And I find it silly, the idea of embrace our uncertainty. Guess what? You're not born knowing how to manage. It's all uncertain. I don't know where we came up with the idea where we need special management for learning how to manage, right? Of course we have to learn how to manage. The idea is, in the first part of that, it's passive adaptive management. And then when you start pushing that system, you're doing management experiments, and that's called active adaptive management. And that's Carl Walters who developed that. And he was my mentor, and I realized that there's a single original idea in this presentation that was mine. It's mostly his. All of it's his. So that's it. Look, I give workshops. And so if you saw this and I inspired you and you actually believe, wait a minute, I could do that, right? He just predicts data and makes up some fake data and learns neat stuff. I would love to hear from you. You could send me an email and tell me you'd be interested in a workshop or you could learn how to do this with your analyses. And if I got enough interest, I'd like to know what your problems are that you're dealing with, because we could even build a workshop that targets what your interests are specifically. And so feel free to shoot me a note, tell me what you're up to, what you're interested in. Email's up there. And if I get the interests, we'll put a workshop together. And here are some pictures of putting field camps out in crazy ways. So I'll field any questions you got. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Yeah. Mm. Resistant, like it wouldn't work well. Yeah. Yeah. That's right. Yeah, so it's asked, are there any systems where this sort of approach wouldn't work well? And of course, the answer is yes. I couldn't say no, right? So probably where it's going to work best is a really simple system that doesn't have a lot of natural variation, really stable, behavioral well. So it's not going to work in Australia, I can tell you that. But so of course, yeah, any sort of system, if you're doing ecological research, right? You're going to collect data, and when you go into a system that's stochastic, that data is noisy, and it's hard to get answers out of it. It's the same place where this is going to be hard to get answers out of. Here's the cool thing, right? It's actually easier to decide which management action is better to do when you've got a set of options in front of you than it is to detect a statistically significant effect. And the reason for that is because we're stuck with these p-values, right? Okay, so that's what we use, or something about that. But when it comes to making a decision, and I base my entire life on this, is that if you got two choices, and it's 51% probable that this is the better choice, and 49% probable that this is the worst choice, or the better choice, I guess, you do the 51. And you always do that, right? Now it's not the best. Like that's pretty lousy uncertainty. But the choice, you don't have to be 95% sure to guide a decision process, right? And you learn as you go. And so when the organizations that I work for, I see some common patterns. One of them is that we've been collecting monitoring data for 20 or 30 years. And, oh, can you help us do stuff with it, right? And I'll come into an organization and realize that there's been enough knowledge to know to collect the data, but the understanding of that you need the right analysis, you need to invest in and value the type of analysis that's going to bring that information back to inform management somehow it's not there. So that's what I see a lot, right? And I don't want to shame anyone. There's a lot of reasons. Guys like me that think about data all day, that's all I think about, right? Of course you should be analyzing your data. That's what I do, right? But this is better than that. It doesn't take much for us to do better from that place, that kind of place. And that's how I'm seeing things. That's the way a lot of the conservation stuff is going. And I see this sort of stuff in environmental flows, invasive species management, water management, groundwater management. It's everywhere. And so no one should feel picked on because it's everywhere. I see this a lot. Even the Australian bass, right? So I'm the first person to put a 33-year data set, put it all together into one analysis, and that's a shame, right? So yeah, this isn't going to work perfect in every system, but boy, it's better than just waiting and gathering data.
Does anyone else?
Yeah, so that question was about what is the accountability of the managers for making responsible or correct management decisions that I've in my experience. Was that
Yeah, and the
scientists,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I could make a joke and say, there's no accountability anywhere. And that wouldn't be true, 100%. Because I've seen, I think one position that managers probably find themselves in. Again, I'm not a manager. I'm speaking for people that I am not. But they're not protected very well often from, they have to be able to make mistakes. We don't know how to manage, right? So they have to be able to make mistakes, in my opinion. There's no room for perfection. We're never going to reach that. And so there needs to be some level of protection, in my opinion. But I've seen managers in fisheries in Alaska make mistakes. He's a good guy. He was my friend. And wow, did he get shamed for that? And wow, did that impact him? And I don't think that was right. And so I don't know. And the scientists, I don't see any. I'm not aware of any accountability in terms for delivering bad advice. I've never seen accountability for that. I know that I'm required to have some insurance in case I get sued for bad advice with my consulting business, but I've never been sued. Yeah, that's a tough one. It's a tough one. And especially with like thinking about the job of a manager, it's like, you're not going to be perfect. You got to make a decision. They have to be made. You don't have good information. I'm the scientist giving you vague information. And now you're going to be like thrown under the bus if you make a bad choice, right? And you can see why often when you think about risk tolerances, often doing the same old is attractive. And we accuse managers of doing that a lot. It's attractive because, God, there's a lot more certainty in that. And I didn't get hiding for it last time I did that. It's a weird space. There's a lot of political pressures. I don't know how to get that part of it right. I know I have a lot of thoughts about numbers and analyses and decision tools, but the complexity of the political pressure and public pressure, I don't fully understand. But you know what they say with the kings and queens, it's lonely at the top. No one likes the decisions you're making. It doesn't matter what decision's going to be made. It's not going to be perfect for everyone. That was a weird answer, huh? Sorry.
Anyone else? No, I have a quick question.
Hit me.
I'll just speak real quick.
Okay.
So, Dan, does this data, like if you've got, I don't know, long-term monitoring data, but maybe you didn't have money to monitor in some years or some months, or like this patchy, does this analysis lend itself to dealing with that kind of thing?
Okay.
Like, because from data sets I've worked on in like river management and things like that, often there's just lots and lots of holes in the data.
I'm sorry you've had to deal with that.
Yeah,
That's
well,
tough.
you've dealt with it with me.
Yeah. Yeah, so you could, like, predictive model is a very general term, right? And so it just so happens that the ones that I use, they're dynamic models. And all that means is it's like it's stepping through time. It's like what happens this year, the catch rates depend on what were the catch rates last year plus a unit of change, right? And the unit of change is related to stocking, right? That's how they operate. It's a really good model structure because it conforms to reality more than just modeling the state of each location based on stocking. Because I'm not going to say this very well, am I? Yeah.
Essentially, it kind of fills in the gaps.
It fills in the gaps because it's like you have a covariant in its last year, right? And the relationship is 1. And so if you don't have a data point for this year, it knows about the sort of variation that goes from year to year, and it fills in this point based on last year and that variation. And in those graphs, you see the uncertainty blowing out, right? If I had good covariates that predicted year-to-year variation, that uncertainty would not blow out, right? But yeah, there's a lot of analytical tricks, ways to squeeze the information out of monitoring data that are exciting and fun.
All right. So that's it? Questions? Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Company $8 million. Next time when they're quoting you for your work, you say, well,
I did this on my own time. They don't have this. They'll be having a chat with them very soon about it. They've seen the preliminary on this, a preliminary analysis. You know, it's a shame. It's going to make you know, when you wasted $8 million, it's tricky, right? It's tricky. The Hatter Lake thing also. They haven't seen any of that. I've had no impact. I was captured, scientifically captured, and I walked away from that project because I was asked to say non-truths by the funders. And so that will never make it anywhere. So how do you like the title of my talk now? So I hope you guys have an impact. Sure. Yeah. So let me think about that. So, of course, it's the right. It's the impact is coming. The X variable is going to be this climate thing, and there's no one thing that's going to be a lever to change the climate around. But you're still interested in scenarios, right? It'll work. It's just you just frame it differently, right? It's serving a different purpose. No one's going to make the decision to get us out of the climate change conundrum, apparently. So you're just going to show us what's going to happen. You can do that. You can totally do that. And you see these types of analysis. And I have done one like that before with fish recruitment in Florida, Swanee River. I didn't particularly like it because the climate predictions were just really weird. They could tell you like, oh, at that GPS coordinate on that day, you get 3 centimeters of rain. Oh, but over here, it's 3.3. And it just, the models may have got better now, you know, but it was odd. I never liked that for that study anyway. But yeah, you could, anything where you can imagine where you might be interested in a scenario, right? A scenario, what would this be? And that scenario isn't a part of your data set, right? Those management scenarios, I didn't have data on them, but I had enough contrast in the analysis to be able to draw inference on them. Not perfect, right? Nothing's ever going to be perfect, never going to be perfect. But if it's all you got, boy, it's a lot better than that. It's a lot better than not doing it, right?
Great. Thanks, Dano.
Sure thing.
There are drinks and snacks just out there. Yeah, and Dan loves talking, so come have a chat to him. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. Thank you all for coming. That was a lot of fun. Thanks for listening to me.